Hello, and welcome to this DevToberfest session called A Beginner's Guide to the ABAP RESTful Application Programming Model. And today we're joined by Fischer, who is a member of the ABAP Product Management team. Hey, Andre, how are you doing?
I'm fine.
Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so I'm with SAP now since 2004. Then before that, I worked in external consulting company for about 10 years. And and since 2011 in SAP, I'm working on the topic of OData service development, starting with good old SAP Gateway, and now member of the ABAP product management team, and they're still working a little bit on SAP Gateway, but working on new topics like the ABAP RESTful programming model or the ABAP environment in SAP BTP, also called Steampunk. So the whole enchilada of ABAP development.
A lot of different topics there. All right. Great. So again, we're here to give the beginners out there a bit of an overview about the ABAP RESTful Application Programming Model. So Andre, take it away.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, let's start. So I will start with a few slides, but then I will jump to a demo where I would like to show you what you can actually do with the ABAP RESTful Application Programming Model. It's a long word, and therefore we also have an abbreviation for that. It's called RAP. That was because in the past it was called RESTful ABAP Programming Model, but this did not fit official terms, but the abbreviation remained, and it also nicely fits to CAP, to the Cloud Application Programming Model. So it's a typical disclaimer that we have in such presentation. And yeah, I would like to show you a small scenario like a hello world that we can do with the ABAP RESTful programming model. And then after I have shown what we are up to, I would provide a short introduction into RAP using slides, and then give an overview what you would have to follow the exercises if you would like to build the scenario that I've shown yourself. Okay, so what is the scenario that I would like to talk about today? So it's a travel scenario. So but not this old, in quotes, travel scenario, you know, from the past. So we have revamped this now, and it's available in GitHub. And the scenario is to build your own app that manages travel instances. And from the existing scenario, we will leverage customer data and agency data so that we don't have to create all this stuff ourselves. And our main business entity will be the travel data. So, and what we want to achieve is we want to build a Fiori app with RAP. So here we would like to build a so-called list report. And what you can do with a list report, and this is different from what you usually do if you build so-called reports, right, or transactions, classic transactions with GUI. So the list report, for example, offers you a freestyle search. So you will find a field where you can enter data, and then you would be able to search for this data in this list. And and we'll see later what you would have to do in order to make certain fields searchable. Then such a list report offers the option to filter your data, for example, for the travel ID or maybe for the agency ID. So these fields have been marked as filters. Then, since it's a transactional application, it allows us to create new entities and also delete existing entities. So you will find a create button and also the option to delete data. In addition to this, what you can do with create, update, and delete, we know stuff which is called actions. So we have here buttons. When we press a button, we can change the status of a travel. And this is something what you would usually not do with a simple create and update, because certain additional business logic will be called. And every, let's say, everything which cannot be done via simple create, update, delete, this will be done via so-called actions in the OData service, which is underneath of this Fiori elements list report. Then this is a really nice feature. It's draft. So you can create new entries in the list. And like in an email where you create a new email, but you have not sent it yet, then it will be stored in your draft folder. So similar, you can think of entities that are not finished yet, so they're not really created, but they are in a draft mode. And the cool thing is you could even, let's say, log on using a different device. You would find your own drafts, and they are, for example, locked against changes from other persons. So, and if we would click here on the small arrow on the right-hand side in such a list report, we will navigate to a details page, which is called the object page. And then you will see the first screen that we see here on the left-hand side. And if we would edit this, so if we press the edit button and the change to the edit mode, fields may become changed such that they allow you to enter data. And even here we have value helps, like for example, for the agency ID, or the customers can be selected. And again, we find new buttons for the actions that apply to such an instance. And when you have changed something here in the edit mode, you will be able to see saving draft, so that the UI tells you that the data is safely stored. Okay, let's start with a demo. Sorry. I will switch now to the application. So this is what you would achieve if you follow a script that's called RUP 100 that we have posted on GitHub. So I will later share, the link so that you can find it. And if you press here the Go button, we will see certain data that has been created. And so if we press here, for example, the Create button, as I said, you will see here value helps that allow you to select data. And you can also select the start date and an end date. And please note here that I now choose something which is wrong, right? And if I press the Create button, I get error messages. For example, it tells me that the begin date must be before the end date. And in addition, I'm being told to enter a customer ID. So I have not done this. And this is something you would have to implement. So this is the work of the ABAP programmer. So the business logic would have to be entered. And if I do this now and choose here an end date, which is somewhere end of October, I would be able to create data. And I could, for example, accept the status or reject it. And you see here automatically the status of my UI changes. Okay, so what is behind this now? So we have seen this. This is something that we can build with RAP. So now some theory. So what is behind this? So the ABAP RESTful programming model is a bunch of things. So we have concepts that are behind this. We use certain tools and we use languages. So not only pure ABAP, but also CDS views. And there are frameworks behind this that do lots of this heavy lifting. And you will see that there are best practices how to build applications using RAP. And all this together allows us to do certain things. So starting from top to bottom, we can build services. So this is what we begin with. So we are building so-called OData services. There are two types of OData services, version 2 and version 4, and both can be built using RAP. So if you have the choice, go for the newer one, because the OData version 4 is the go-to version of OData you should use. And based on these services, we can achieve two things. We can either build services for UI-based service development. This is what I just showed. But it's also possible to build web APIs. So even maybe the same business objects that we are going to build can be used for both. And the cool thing is the implementation is the same. So the implementation is agnostic to the specific protocol being used. And we have a programming model, that's the second point, which is can be used universally. If we look in the OData development in the past, so with good old SGW, or the programming model that was before the ABAP RESTful programming model, which is called the SAP Fiori programming model, we saw that there are different approaches that were used if we implemented greenfield or brownfield development. So greenfield development is something where you start totally from scratch. You have a new table and nothing is really there yet. So you build your application, and brownfield development would be something that you would do if you build an application that uses existing APIs, for example, an application that calls a BAPI locally. And ABAP is going to the cloud, so we'll see that later. So I will show the development within the ABAP environment of the SAP BTP. But the ABAP RESTful programming model is not only available for the cloud, it can also be used on premise. And that's a nice thing, because you could, for example, start with such a development. So you could use in development that you have done on premise, you could use it in the cloud, and vice versa. Okay, you have to see that certain things are adhered to. For example, if you're in the cloud, you're only allowed to call released APIs, whereas on-prem, you would still have the opportunity to misbehave and call even not released APIs from SAP, which I would not recommend, but that would be possible. But this programming model can be used on-prem and in the cloud, and it's used by SAP Development to develop services for SAP S/4HANA on-prem and in the cloud. So all new development at SAP is done using RAP. And that's also a very important thing, not listed here on this slide, because if you want to change something or you want to adapt an existing service, you will want to build an extension, stuff like that, it's mandatory that you understand what is going up behind the scenes. So what is needed in order to build applications using RAP? First of all, we have to have a look at the tooling, and that means you have to use the ABAP development tools in Eclipse for all development tasks. So that means there is no development with SAP GUI-based UIs anymore. As a matter of fact, no SAP GUI access is possible in the cloud, and that's why our tooling does not support SAP GUI anymore for that. So you would have and CDS views, for example, they can also not be developed with SAP GUI-based tooling. So this brings me to the languages. So there are two types of languages being used. So for this ABAP and this new type of ABAP that we have, this is there. But in addition, you are going to build so-called core data services, CDS views. And behind the scenes, the framework of the RAP is doing something for you. If you leverage this, like, for example, numbering and stuff like that. So this is, and it allows you to publish your business logic using different protocols. So you could build a service that could either be published via OData version 2 and OData version 4 without changing a single line of code in your implementation. So here, for those that have not seen Eclipse so far, that's a screenshot. This is how the application, our development environment looks like. And the next thing is that we have CDS views. So what are CDS views? So from the past, you know views in ABAP, and you know that the lifecycle management in ABAP was or is very powerful. Whereas in SAP HANA, there are lots of options to build more advanced views, so more on database level. But the lifecycle management, was not like in ABAP, so you could not do several things. And what we are doing here is we are getting the best of two worlds. We get an enhanced option of view building within ABAP. That this we call ABAP CDS. It allows you to push down the functionality down to the database. So selects are done near the database layer and not in the ABAP layer. And lifecycle management is within ABAP. So the definitions of such CDS views are transported. And we have a new type. We have new ABAP artifacts which are there. So this is an example. Now, one of the new really powerful features is the so-called entity manipulation language. So if we have a RAP object, then we can use code like read or modify entities from BO, and then we specify the entity, and then we can specify which fields are updated. And the framework will deliver us then all the keys that are needed. And then here in this case, we are changing just one field to accept it. So let's now switch to this big picture. So we have seen that there are different options, ABAP development and CDS development. So we start with the modeling. So this is done by your CDS views. So if you have thought about your data model, you will build CDS views. And if you use transactional processing, you will create new type of objects, so-called behavior definitions, and you do the ABAP implementation in the so-called behavior definition. Behavior implementation, behavior definition is done on CDS level, and it's even possible to build analytical models. And on top of this, we have a projection layer, so that allows us to reuse an existing object and to build a specific projection view on the CDS level, but also on the behavior definition level. That means you could define whether a certain action or whether a grade is possible in your service at all, which is maybe possible in your business object, but you would build a service that would, for example, not allow to create certain data, but only update data. Finally, you define in a service definition what's the scope of your service, and then bind it to a certain protocol. And then here you end up with different, with different opportunities. So you could either use Fiori UIs to consume your services, or you will end up with web APIs, or you could even consume your services in an SQL-like fashion, like an ODBC data source. So let's maybe, I promised that I would switch to ABAP. So here I've prepared a table. So this is then Eclipse. So we have here a table, and if I press Ctrl+, I can make this larger so that you can read it. And this is the syntax that allows us to define a table. So we find here the key fields, and then other fields, and these are based on this data model I've been talking about, this new flight data model, which resides in its own namespace /DMO/. And here, this is the information which field contains the currency code for the booking fee and the total price. Okay, so if I now right-click on this table, there is we have built a wizard that allows you to generate all these objects I've been talking about in the last slide. Because if you now see what is the outcome, you will see that there are lots of objects to be created, and lots of this is just boilerplate coding. So you have to do every time the same, and therefore it makes sense to have a wizard here. So we start here with that wizard, and now I'm switching here to the script. So this is so the data definition. So that will be here my RAP demo dev Oktoberfest. I would select the generator. So we are going to build a UI-based service. And now we have to enter the names of our repository object. So the naming convention here is that we start with a namespace here. That would be that ZRAP100. That's our, let's say, Z namespace. And this is just here because we are the script is used for workshops, and we use that system or these systems for lots of users. And in order to be able to distinguish between the different groups, we usually use those unique identifiers like a number that you would add at the end of the repository object. So the alias would be travel. And the alias name is which can be seen to the outside. So your entity will be called travel, and that's the name of the data definition, the CDS used. And here we use the naming convention of SAP S/4HANA. So then this CDSU is reading the data from a table, and this lowest level we call restriction views, and therefore this R is used. In addition, we use as a naming convention TP for transactional processing. So then we have the CDS view, and then we have the behavior. So the behavior definition always has the same name as the data model, as the CDS view. Therefore, I don't have to choose any name here, but I have to choose a name for the behavior implementation class. So the ABAP code that is going to be, that is executed when you press certain buttons. So the implementation class, we also call it behavior pool, and therefore we use the abbreviation BP for that. In addition, there has to be a draft table. So you have seen that in the screenshots, so that data can be stored before it's actually saved to the database table. And for this, we need a shadow table for each entity. And that would be a draft table. And usually you will find in the name of the table somewhere a D. Then the service projection. So the service projection is there we use as the naming convention is C. This is then has historical reasons. The C stands for consumption. So maybe you know from the Fiori programming model the term consumption model or consumption view. And therefore we use C there. And we have a service definition, which will list all the entities that are part of our service. For this, we need a separate object. And finally, last not least, we need a service binding. And here we use in the naming, we all also use the type of OData protocol. So the wizard here is only able or only supports the generation of OData version 4. But in principle, the same service that is going to be generated here on top of the service definition could also provide an OData version 2 service. So if I press next, so I'm being presented the objects that are going to be generated, and I really strongly recommend that you follow a naming convention. Because if you don't do so, it will be hard, just to judge from the name what role your object has. So it's and this is a naming convention which is also used in SAP S/4HANA. Unfortunately, it's not enforced by the wizard. Hopefully, with one of the next versions, we will have this. So I asked for a transport request. We are working here, by the way, on an SAP BTP ABAP environment system. And but so far you have not seen it, what kind of system this is. And you see that that now the wizard or the ADT is busy with generating artifacts. So there are quite a bunch of artifacts that are being generated, and therefore it takes a while. And it's also a demo system, which is not quite powerful. So now, after I have been talking here a while, the objects have been generated, and the service binding UI is opened in ADT. And if I now press right click on my package and use refresh, I will see that the number of objects in the package is jumping from 2 to 12. So I had a class. Okay, this class was already there. I created it to generate some demo data in those tables. And here one class is for the behavior implementation. But let's start in the logic. So you remember this picture here. So the CDS entities, the business object, CDSU, behavior definition, behavior implementation. Where do we find this? So this is here. So this is in the core data services. The data definition is a root view entity, and it selects from the table and as travel. And this is the alias that we have chosen. And in the behavior definition folder, we find our behavior definition. And this is now new in ABAP RESTful programming model. So it's a new type of object and a new syntax. So here we find code like managed implementation in class blah, 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 TP 900 unique, and that's this class here. And it specifies that the behavior of our RAP-BO supports draft. And there is a term called strict. Strict is important if you want later to extend your OData, your RAP-BO. Then you should use the highest strict mode possible. So we introduced now a strict 2 mode. Maybe in the future we will have additional strict modes. Because if you don't follow this strict, so when you follow the strict mode in your implementation, the source code will be checked during design and runtime, and exceptions would be thrown if your implementation does not follow this. And we define here the behavior for our RAP, of our root BO. Here, define root view entity. So this is our behavior which is defined for that. And we tell the framework, the RAP framework, where to find. So what is the database table that stores the data? We find the information, what is our draft table. We find which field is responsible to hold the ETAG master or the total ETAG. So that's in this case the same because we just have one entity. But if we would have an RAP-BO that consists out of several entities, the total ETAG would be usually a timestamp in your root entity, whereas local ETAGs are used for each entity, and an ETAG you can look at it as at the timestamp, which can be used by the UI to check whether the data has been changed or not, because we are dealing here with apps that are not stateful but stateless. But at the same time, we have to ensure the data is not changed by 2 different persons, and the one does not know that the other has changed something. And for this, we need ETAGs. It's also called optimistic locking. Then we define which fields are read-only. So, for example, some administrative fields that store when an object has been created and by whom, and when it was changed and locally last changed. So all these timestamps or usernames will be stored in administrative fields. We define whether the service supports create, update, delete. And for this draft works technically with so-called actions. So opening a draft is an edit action, and yeah, getting back to such an opened draft is a resume, and we have so-called determination actions. So actions that are run when a draft is actually created. Then we define the mapping. So this is the mapping between the, let's say, between the ABAP field names, which usually use underscores to get readable field names, whereas in a CDS you could use camel case notation, and yeah, that would end up with such a field. Okay, we can, everything has been generated. So what I could also do in the meantime is to press here the publish button. This will also take some time. In the meantime, we can have a look at the projection layer. Remember here, this projection layer on top of this base layer. So we have a root view entity, which is a projection on our root BO. Also, the behavior is being projected. For example, I could, let's say, uncomment here the create statement, the use create, and you will then see that there will be no create button in our UI. And we have metadata extensions files, so they define information about which columns are shown in which order and by default, and also in the details. So this can be nicely managed by so-called metadata extensions. And the draft table here, this is similar in structure to the table that holds the active data, but you will see that the names of the fields are not the ABAP field names, but the field names of the projection view. So that can be found here. So maybe in the meantime, we see that the service has been published. And if we select it and press the preview button, that's a cool thing. We have an ADT, in ADT now the option to start a Fiori Elements preview. So the ABAP developer can test now the service without having to use Business Applications Studio and to deploy a complete app. So that's still necessary if you want to later use an app. But the ABAP developer can go ahead and test here. And if I press now go, why do I find now data? This is because in the beginning I filled the data, and if I press here F8, you see here this is the data that we now also see in our Fiori Elements app, and we see here nicely nice column descriptions. They are taken from the data element information. And if I press here, I can also navigate here to the details. But what you see is there is no create button. Why? Because I have removed that from the behavior definition. So if I press here now, generate, if I activate my code again, and if I refresh my app, so with F12, I can enforce the reload of my cache, and now I have a create button, and I can create a travel entity with the travel ID, but nothing is checked. So I'm now lucky that the number works. And this is where the ABAP developer would have to do something. they would have to do something here and to build something in a local handler class to implement so-called determinations and actions. So we can have a look here in the complete implementation of the solution. And here we find in the local types several methods like early numbering, create for numbering, set status to open is a determination. And we find here methods that are run when data has been modified. And in the behavior definition, we find additional statements like this validation, validate customer on save when a field has been changed, and this is run when something is created. So this is a new syntax. Yes, you have to learn this as an ABAP developer, but as I have seen, there is a steep learning curve ABAP developers usually follow, so they know this, right? And the cool thing here is it's not stored in annotations anymore, like in the Fiori programming model. Now this is ABAP code. So this is a totally different behavior when doing debugging. Okay, so this, I hope that I was able here to give you an impression what needs to be done in the development, so that we have a wizard that does something for boilerplate coding, but as you see, there is lots of other code you have to write, so ABAP developers will not become workless. Let's switch here back to our presentation. So what is our business object? So we have a data model, which is a composition tree. So it's not only that you usually would have just one node, there can be several nodes like sales order, header, and items. You have this behavior that is defined in the behavior definition, and it's implemented in the behavior implementation as ABAP code. And yeah, this is then our runtime implementation, which and there we distinguish between the interaction phase and the save sequence. So if I work in the UI, so I enter a certain data, and before I really press the create button, which would then save the data, then something is maybe modified. So I'm changing a field, and then these methods are called. And in the save sequence, this is when I press the create button, certain methods are run. So first the data is finalized, and in the adjust number phase, that's the point of no return, then everything must be consistent. And if something goes wrong there, the framework would react with a dump before finally saving the data here. If it's successful, the data is then saved to the database. And the transactional buffer, this is something that would, in this case, be provided by the framework, because we have used a so-called managed application. So we distinguish between managed and unmanaged, because in an unmanaged implementation, the developer would have to take care about this transactional buffer. They would have to implement this themselves, or they would reuse it from the BAPI, for example. So it allows you to call those classic APIs, but you have to do more. Whereas the managed approach, it's for greenfield implementation. Yeah, lots of things are done for you by the framework. And you could concentrate on building the business logic. And the development flow is that you usually start with creating tables, and on top of this, you will build a CDS view. And then you add behavior. Looking back here, this is our CDS view now in the solution. And for this, we define a behavior. So where we tell the framework what our business object is all going to do. And we have implemented this behavior. So for example, if we select this and I press Control F3, if I press F3, then I would navigate to the method which actually runs the business logic when the button deduct discount is pressed. And then we need a data model projection. So you have seen I've done something to my projection. I've removed the create button. So here we can influence which parts of the business object are actually being exposed from a functional perspective, and the service definition defines which entities are part of our service. So you could imagine a business object that has maybe 10 entities, and the service definition that you are using is actually only exposing 5 of them. And last not least, you are binding this to a protocol. And we are able, as ABAP developers now, to leverage the preview in order to have a preview of our application. So the complete scenario you find here, if you want to go through that, is you start here really creating from scratch, from creating a database table and generate the UI service. That was the wizard that I showed you. And then you would enhance the data model by adding numbering, determinations, validations, and actions. And the data model is being enhanced before that by adding UI annotations. And there are also some more advanced exercises available that allow you to create unit testing or having so-called dynamic feature control. So when I press a button that may be based on the content of the field, I can press the button or not, so that the UI would adapt to the content, to the, you can have additional business logic here. And finally, we describe here in a simple example to use the entity manipulation language in order to access our business object in a programmatic way. So that was the demo that I already showed, and the key takeaways of our of this here is that the ABAP RESTful programming model allows you really efficiently to build services and new type of UIs, and and you get the best out of your SAP HANA and Fiori elements. RAP is available on-premise starting with 1909, though here we have to be fair, it's not really usable in that release. So with 2020, that's the first chance to get meaningful apps out of it. With 2021, we call it mass adoption ready. And with 2022 now, we have added additional features for final roundup. And in the cloud, the feature scope is delivered on a quarterly basis, whereas on-prem on a yearly basis. And in SAP S/4HANA Cloud now, we also have BTP environment available. And there we have a shipment every 6 months. So you will find more information here in those links. So we have special topic pages in the SAP community that explain more about different topics. So about the ABAP RESTful programming model and the BTP environment, and also S/4HANA. And in the interactive roadmap explorer, you could have a glimpse what to find there. And there you can deduct from the result, from the release number, let's say if it would be 2011, that's something which would then be delivered with the next release. So that would be in 2021, and so you can conclude from the cloud releases what has been delivered in the on-prem releases. There is also an Open SAP course, so with lots of videos, and already, we did this a while ago, but it's still valid that you can still follow what we have explained there, can still be used, and it's for free, and it's working now in a self-paced mode. Further information is here a complete list of links about the ABAP RESTful programming model and other topics and how to modernize your applications, including our websites. And if you seek for official SAP training, that also deals now with RAP. Yeah, so that would be then the end of my talk. So you could either contact me or my colleague, Karin Chutter-Jomo. She is with me in the ABAP RESTful programming model, and we both are working on the RAP topic.
Yeah, so thanks for that great overview, Andre. I really appreciate that. I'm sure this session will help our beginners out there get started with developing ABAP applications using the ABAP RESTful application programming model. And again, thanks to our viewers for joining. And don't forget, DevToberfest rolls on all week long with various sessions every day. So check out the event calendar to see what's going on. And we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.
See you.